Experts on the Wire is sponsored by BuzzSumo, a tool where you can find the key influencers to promote your content. Stay tuned to find out how you can get 30% off 3 months from BuzzSumo. Okay, let's get into today's show. This is the Digital Marketing Experts Podcast episode. No, why am I trying to sound like a radio announcer?
SEO plays such a larger role. Right? We get for lots of our products, we get more than 50% of conversions from SEO. One thing that we look at very, very closely, especially at Atlassian, is, for example, keyword cannibalization. And that is a tricky topic. Like, why would site A be allowed to rank for keyword X and not site B? So it's one thing to read in a big ranking factor study that something is important, and it's another thing to apply that and make your own experiences.
Hey everyone, welcome to episode 83 of Experts on the Wire. It's kind of rare to speak to an in-house SEO. In fact, I interviewed an in-house SEO at a very large company a few months ago, and then she later emailed me back and said, you can't publish the interview. They just had too many in-house politics. So my guest today is Kevin Indig. He is an in-house SEO at Atlassian, a company responsible for many products you may have heard of: Trello, Jira, SourceTree, Confluence, the list goes on and on. Today I'm going to find out how he drives technical SEO results and ultimately rankings and traffic in-house at Atlassian. We're going to get to you in just a moment, Kevin. Hang tight. But first I want to let everyone know that last episode I mentioned there'd be a contest to win a free SEMrush account. What they said, they told me in an email, a free extended account. That's happening today. I'm going to tease you a little bit because it's at the end of this episode. I'm going to tell you what you need to do to enter this contest to win a free SEMrush account. So stick around for that. Kevin, welcome. How are you?
Yeah, I'm super pumped to be in your podcast. Thank you so much for having me. You had all these people that I personally look up to, so I'm more than happy to be on your podcast as well.
Absolutely. I want to ask you first, jump right into your background. Why did you end up not becoming a doctor?
I love that question, actually. So I think, so for the audience to know, so my dad is a doctor, right? My mom is a nurse and now has her own kind of practice. My brother is becoming a doctor, so I'm kind of the black sheep of the family. And if you grow up in a medical household, so to say, you're born with that kind of desire to become a doctor as well. And I had that for the longest time. You know, my first job was in a hospital, scraping pots and pans for $6 an hour. I grew up in this kind of hospital environment. I always wanted to become a doctor. And then at some point when I turned 17, 18, 19, somewhere in those years, I kind of realized that I do want to have an impact on people. I do want to help people, but it was not it was not the right fit for me in the sense that, doctors have it's not easy being a doctor. I think you start out being that idealist and then you end up with, politics, bureaucracy, all that stuff, lawsuits here in the US. So it kind of made that a little bit salty for me, but I still kept that kind of mindset of a doctor going that is very close or similar to an SEO's mindset or a reverse engineer's mindset. And that is, you have a patient, you put together or puzzle together the symptoms, and then you find a remedy, right? And you create a diagnosis and you find a remedy. And I think as SEOs, we pretty much do the same, right? We have a problem, like there's not enough traffic, or there has been a penalty, or something in those realms, and then we put together the symptoms and we piece it together to diagnose, and then we create a strategy out of that. So it kind of stuck with me.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned in your LinkedIn profile something that I really liked was being a doctor. It's one-on-one. You can only help so many people, but helping people online, you can help people at scale, and I really like that approach as well. For context, before we talk about Atlassian, what are a few of the other companies or situations you've worked in before Atlassian?
Yeah, very good question as well. So to give a little more background, I was born and raised in Germany. My dad is American, so I grew up, speaking both languages, somewhat. I started out my career in Europe doing a lot of management consulting in terms of SEO and online marketing for all kinds of bigger enterprises. It was airlines, was TV networks, travel companies, insurances, banks, all that kind of stuff. So I was very, very lucky that early on I was put in an environment of, enterprises and large corporations. So my background is really with those companies, and then also former startups that became large corporations, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But it's really of the scale of Pinterest, eBay, and then when I switched in-house, it was companies like Dailymotion that are also that are large companies and even larger websites, and so Atlassian kind of fits perfectly into that order.
So let's set the stage for Atlassian. Just give us a quick overview of what the company is, what the products are, and then we'll take it from there.
Perfect. Atlassian, most people don't know Atlassian. I have to admit, I didn't know Atlassian before I started there, but I knew Jira. That was probably the first software that I ever touched when on my first job. We have products like Confluence, Bitbuckets, Trello, you mentioned, HipChat, and now Stride, which is a brand new product that we just released. The company is in many, many ways very interesting. So it's been a public company for a little over a year, but started out very bootstrapped by two young guys in their college dorms in Australia, in Sydney. And they grew the company very organically. And we have this unique kind of business model that involves basically no sales team. And that makes it even more interesting because SEO plays such a larger role. Right? We get for lots of our products, we get more than 50% of conversions from SEO. So it's pretty much baked into the DNA of the company, which is a pretty sweet spot to be in.
Yeah, we're going to get to all the SEO stuff in just a moment. How many domains are there under Atlassian? Is it just Atlassian, or are there other domains and properties?
Yeah, we got a ton, man. We have about 15 sites, more or less, depending on how you bake it, right? But we have from Atlassian.com and various subdomains like our marketplace, our community. We also have, again, HipChat.com, Bitbucket.org. We have Trello.com. We have blogs for all these properties. We have SourceTree. We have status page. We have a couple of smaller products, so we have a ton out there.
Do you have an idea, like in general, how many total pages we might be talking about? Is it in the millions? Like, what's the rough scale of that?
Oh yeah, it's in the hundreds of millions. If you look at Trello and how many Trello boards there are alone, then we're talking about a lot of pages.
So it's large. And specifically, what is your role at Atlassian?
Yeah, I run the technical SEO team at Atlassian. So
how big is that team?
So we just had a new hire. Well, basically, the SEO team consists of 4 people right now. I just hired a new person from my team, and then we're very integrated with other teams as well. So the core team is about 4 people, and we're trying to stem that huge rock that is Atlassian.
And so, as a part of the technical SEO team, what are the specific goals, metrics, things that you're focused on that you care about directly?
Yeah, we share the kind of common goal, which is very closely tied to organic traffic and the conversions from that. And then from a technical standpoint of view, we have a couple of sub-metrics that we look at besides the KPIs. Now, it varies a little bit from product to product or brand to brand. It's hard to unify one metric for all of the brands because we have such different business types, right? We have a community, as I said, we have a marketplace, we have regular landing pages, we have blogs, we have microsites. So it's hard to put that all under one metric and just judge everything by that. But rankings play a certain role, and then metrics tied to the crawl frequency and the index pages and how they perform. So we really try, don't want to get too deep in the weeds yet, but we really try to understand how many quality pages we have out there versus just how many pages in general. And that then allows us to really understand what impact our traffic makes and whatnot.
Excellent. Yeah, making some notes. By the way, for the listeners out there, for some context, initially, the way this interview happened, you emailed me with some content you were looking for a home for. I was really impressed with the content, but I don't really publish guest content on evolvingseo.com. I think I sent you a few places. You might have published it on your own site. It was a great article. It's machine learning for SEO. I'll link to it in the show notes. But then we got to chatting in the email, and then it came about that you could be a guest on the podcast. So that's sort of like, I like to give the context for listeners, because some guests I kind of reach out to and I'm like, oh, I saw you speak and I want to ask you about this. But in this case, what I have here from Kevin is a list of like some rough things that we're going to chat about. And I'm kind of taking notes, making my own questions. I had some questions ahead of time, and I even took questions from some folks on Twitter. So I'm going to try to meld everything together in real time, but I want to give listeners that context. It's not like a show when I bring on John Mueller that I sweat for 4 hours over, because I want to like not waste this. Not that I don't want to waste your time, Kevin, but I'm saying when you get John Mueller on the line, like you don't want to waste any second asking him questions. So that's just the context. So okay, let's get back into it. What I have here from you, Kevin, is some things that you wanted to cover in terms of doing SEO at Atlassian. I think I'd like to begin with the things that you wanted to leave as takeaways, and then what we don't cover, I will ask as questions, and we'll jump to audience questions. So you mentioned wanting to tell the audience how to set up an in-house SEO structure from kind of beginning to the end, like setting the KPIs, hiring, etc. So let's start at the beginning of that. And by the way, for the listeners, we are going to get to like rankings and all that fun stuff, but let's start at this beginning point. Setting up an in-house SEO structure at a company of this scale, what does that look like?
Yeah, awesome. And by the way, then you do a really good job with the podcast. I want to say that before we continue. But yeah, so what does an SEO in-house structure really mean? And I thought about, and I do think about that a lot. Once, because it's my job, but on the other side, because we're at a level of maturity for SEO where a lot of companies actually have in-house SEO teams and enterprise SEO teams, or at least people, and I think that's a huge step forward. And I think the topic is not discussed enough. And so I'll put an effort in the future to put out more content around that. But to bring it back to the question, I think an SEO structure is absolutely essential, especially when you're in an environment where you cannot do everything. I think one point that the audience has already grasped is that, even with an 8-person team at Atlassian, we can't do everything compared to somebody taking care of just one site or one blog as an SEO. So what you really have to do is you have to evangelize SEO throughout the company and provide the necessary information and framework so that non-SEOs can also contribute to your success. And that's where the whole point about structure is really coming from, right? And so we made a really good experience at Atlassian by creating a couple of assets that we constantly use. And one of those assets is an SEO knowledge base. And you can imagine it in a way that it's something like a wiki, right? Where you provide all kinds of information from definitions of SEO terminology and what SEO is at all, to small little guides like how do I get the search volume for a keyword, or why is that even important? What does it really mean? These small pieces of information that make people dangerous enough to then go out and create content that is, way more valuable for SEO, opposed to just going out there and writing something purely creative, which is not wrong, but you get what I'm trying to say.
Let me stop you and ask you right there. I love that. That's something I try to initiate as an external consultant in a company. The company was later sold and closed down, so that's why things just kind of like went down in flames, I think. But what sort of tools or where are you keeping this information in a way that's organized, easy to access, everyone goes to the same place? What are you using for that?
Yeah, that's a perfect time for a shameless plug. I mean, of course, we use Confluence for that, which is our wiki solution. It's the first that comes to mind. But it doesn't have to be that. You can completely bootstrap it with something like Google Docs. I've had success before when I was a consultant in just printing out physical pieces of paper that people can pin to their desks and have just a checklist for stuff. It can be very bootstrapped. It can be very organized. Whatever solution you use, I think it's important for that information just to live somewhere, for people to be aware I can find information about SEO there. Because in many cases, SEO actually is a huge contributor to people's goals, and they're not hesitant to use it or to contribute to it. They just don't want to make the effort, and I can totally understand them, where they're coming from. They want to make the effort to understand SEO from scratch and then, become SEOs themselves. So we have the job to support them and deliver them everything possible and make it as easy as possible for them to understand it so that they can become dangerous and help us to achieve our goals.
How do you deal with the fact that SEO changes a lot? Do you have to update these things all the time? Like, that's one thing, thinking ahead to this company I was working with, I was thinking like, oh my goodness, we're going to need to be updating this thing like every day practically. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. And I basically separate SEO knowledge, quote unquote, into two buckets. And one is the never changing thing, right? Like concepts like search volume, keywords or topics, links, like those concepts, or page rank, those concepts don't ever change. Their weighting in the ranking or their impact on ranking might change to a degree, but the concepts don't. So that's one bucket. And the other one is the one that's, an ever flux and that's progressing heavily. And so we really make an effort to store more information about those things that don't change a lot. And the other things we try to evangelize with things like newsletters, internal newsletters, and internal blogs. So that's one thing that I think I really learned at Atlassian, or it really became, obvious for me at Atlassian, is the power of blogging for the company. It happens actually a lot at Atlassian, and it's a perfect way to either keep people informed or evangelize your department or discipline, and that is huge, and people want to hear that, and you can make it interesting. And at the same time, you understand even more about the topic if you blog about it.
By the way, something occurred to me. How big is the company Atlassian as a whole in terms of employees? How many employees?
Yeah, we're scratching 2,000 now. We're rapidly growing and scaling since last year. So we're not at 2,000 yet, but very close to it. And we have offices all over the world, of course, from Sydney to here in SF, and then Amsterdam, Singapore, Japan. We're pretty well spread out.
That's great. So you also mentioned in your notes here, defining KPIs for this situation like this. So what does that process look like in terms of the in-house SEO?
Yeah, that's a huge challenge depending on how many sites you're looking at, right? And obviously there's some you have to prioritize a little higher and some you have to prioritize a little lower. Now, I already mentioned that we look at the conversions from organic traffic. That's a huge play for us because just organic traffic just doesn't cut it, especially because we don't really have a sales team. So SEO for us is more than just the top of the funnel brand awareness or awareness in general play. It's also a conversion driver. So conversions for organic traffic is the overall ranking metric.
Do you separate out last touch versus first touch and assisted? And how important is that? Because I know for a company that doesn't do sales, and I liken this to maybe Moz, where they comment that like somebody visits them 7 times or more before they sign up, and that's their best customer. How much are you looking at the assisted path?
Yeah, I love that question, Dan, because it's so big. And yes, we do look at last touch versus first touch. And SEO is, it's hard to just judge from the last touch attribution. I can tell you so much. I think most businesses fall into that kind of bucket. And, we have so many different assets out there that are top of the funnel. So the way that we look at things is we distinguish in the SEO funnel between 3 stages, right? The first is the top of the funnel, and that serves searches or queries where people have no transactional intent. They don't want to buy anything. They just want to learn something about a topic. Say in our world, that would be Git, right? They just want to learn what Git is and what happens with Git. And then in the second stage of the funnel, the middle of the funnel, they know they need a solution for something, but they have not yet made a product decision. And that demands, or that needs different content than the top of the funnel or bottom of the funnel. And then obviously bottom of the funnel is where people know they want our product, and we send them right to our product pages or landing pages, and then they sign up there.
And so, what you're really talking about is the customer journey, right? The path, and then you must map that to keywords?
Yes, we do map that to keywords and also user intent. There's a little difference in those, but mainly, it's pretty straightforward.
Would you say that you equally focus on all three stages in terms of trying to drive traffic and drive actions? Because I know some companies, like I've worked with some clients where I try to pitch them content ideas that are top of funnel. And I'm like, look, just track your assisted conversions. Like you'll get, like it'll happen. And they don't want that. They want the traffic that's going to drive the last touch. So do you focus equally on all three in terms of goals?
We do not. That's another fantastic question. I think traditionally, Atlassian, or the products of Atlassian, especially Jira, were so strong that it was enough to focus mainly on the bottom of the funnel, right? Now, especially with the internet changing in a way that people become more and more annoyed by ads and adverse to being sold, we focus much more on top of the funnel, right? We really just try to be helpful in the first place and are very, very passive about converting users in that stage. So I would even say it's a 60-30-10 distribution in terms of time and effort on the funnel.
Let's move to your second point, which was how to handle SEO for massive versus smaller sites. And I'd love to kind of segue this and have this touch upon really what all SEOs and listeners want to know about is how do they increase rankings and traffic, right? So I think in this context, we'll certainly talk about SEO for big sites, but also leading towards what are the things that Atlassian are you trying to do to move that ranking needle? So let's jump in.
Great.
I'm sure you have some notes on this part.
A couple notes on that part. So obviously doing SEO for large sites versus smaller sites is completely different, right? The benefit of living in a large site or large, mass page environment is that you don't need to worry as much about backlinks all the time as you would for a smaller site, right? So I think smaller site SEO, I really, I would focus a little more on the content side of things, content marketing, creating something really, really great for the users. And it's not that you don't want to create something great for users on a large site, but you just have to deal with different topics. And it's much more of a technical play there. So, one thing that we look at very, very closely, especially at Atlassian, is, for example, keyword cannibalization. And that is a tricky topic. Like, why would site A be allowed to rank for keyword X and not site B? That is a trade-off and a decision we have to make on a constant basis. And one solution for that is to really closely monitor our keywords and then test. Test in the sense that how would keyword A perform on site X versus site Y? We give the ranking to different sites and then see where we get better user signals. Where would people stay longer and eventually sign up?
And you're talking about two different sites, meaning two different Atlassian sites, because you have multiple domains you're working with. So what you're doing there is you're saying, well, we can't rank the same keyword on multiple sites. Let's see which one it works best on.
Yes, we can sometimes rank multiple sites for the same keyword, and we try, but there's always one site you have to prioritize. Right, one site that basically gets the number one ranking if you have the luxury of it playing out that way. And so that's a constant battle that we fight because obviously we have some overlapping keywords. Just imagine, imagining a site that deals with the support and questions for a product versus the actual product landing page.
Right.
Which of those are supposed to rank for certain keywords? So we try to play that out as good as we can. But that's one of the topics that when you deal with one site or a smaller site, you usually don't have to deal with.
And so one thing you mentioned a little bit before was the importance of looking at crawling, number of index pages, quality of pages. And so I'm curious what types of things you do there. And also maybe on the end of that, do you do log file analysis? And maybe we could just talk about this in general, crawling, indexing, etc.
Yeah, awesome. Love that stuff because that's what I think really technical SEO is mostly about. It's going a layer deeper and looking at the numbers and the back end a little more. So yes, we do look at crawl budget and crawl in general a lot. And yes, we do a lot of log file analysis for that. Obviously, with 15 sites, it's a little different. It's a little difficult. And when you have millions and maybe tens of millions of pages like Trello, you cannot you have to scale that to a certain extent.
So
but for us, it's
do you use a certain tool for that?
We we do a lot of filtering for our log files before we export them into the raw format, right? So we have databases where we do a lot of filtering for like the user agents, so we make sure we only look at Googlebot, and then sometimes only look at a certain subdirectory or a certain set of pages, or of course a certain time frame. If you look at the log files from last week, it's a huge difference compared to the last 6 months, right? And then we sometimes, break it down with simple Excel or Google Docs, and sometimes we have to get a little more sophisticated with that.
Are you able to say do you use any tools like Deep Crawl or OnCrawl or Keylime Toolbox, or there's many tools out there you can use to analyze log files?
Yes, we also have a couple of those third parties. I think Bodify is another one to mention in those realms. And Searchmetrics surely is another one, not necessarily to only look at log files, but we use a set of solutions because first, all of these have their unique strengths. And second, it's just so much data that it makes sense for us to use several solutions.
That's what I end up doing too. So what do you look for in the log files, in the crawl analysis, to ultimately, what are some things that you've seen that have helped move the ranking needle?
Yeah, perfect. So one very, very straightforward analysis that you can do is to map the log files to your rankings. So you would look at the rankings per URL and then look at the crawl frequency within a certain time to that same URL. And what I saw is that very often we see a direct correlation to how often Googlebot visits a certain page and how well it ranks. Then in the second, you can drive that a little further and drive yourselves completely crazy with that. You can then look at the way that your pages are linked or interlinked. So, for example, you can do that with Screaming Frog, for example, or a solution that we talked about earlier that can crawl a larger set of pages. And then you could see, for example, you could calculate an internal page rank, so to say. And one tool that I use for that is Gephi, that even has a nice visualization. And you can then look, okay, this is how often Googlebot visits a page, this is how well it ranks, and this is how well it's interlinked. And then you would see another correlation of how well internal linking is for a certain page and how often Googlebot gets there and how well it ranks.
And when you say internal link, do you mean both link depth and number of internal links, or one or the other?
Yes, I do mean both of them. And I think in a perfect world, you could even look at the context out of which it is linked and the anchor text, but that gets, But I think on a larger scale, it gets way too sophisticated, and that's when your brain explodes.
So let's say you find a page that's really important. It's ranking average 10. It's not crawled as often. It's not interlinked as well, etc. What are some action items that you can take to improve crawl frequency, and move that up the ranking?
Yeah, so one thing that I'm interested in is how many clicks does it take from the homepage to get there? So what's the crawl depth? And how many external backlinks do we get? And then I get a rough idea about its link power aside of the whole content play and, does it satisfy user intent? That should be given in that context.
Do you think the external links, and this is something I've thought about before, I'm just kind of asking it ad hoc, I almost wonder if external links impacts crawl frequency as much as it passes, quote, page rank. And that's one of the factors that how backlinks actually influences rankings.
I cannot give the answer for the whole SEO world, but we do see strong correlations for that. So we have made the experience that this is indeed true, whereas if you would get a link that gets a lot of traffic, interestingly, that would also impact the crawl frequency.
Yeah, and so let's say you find a page, it has a low click depth. Are we talking about finding a page that's like 12 clicks below the homepage, or 4 clicks, or where's the difference there? Because you can only put so many links on the homepage, and then you can only put so many links 2 steps away from that. So how do you, where are we going from 15 to 2? Give us a specific idea of that.
Yeah, for sure. So we don't have this threshold where we by default say if a page takes more than 7 clicks from the homepage, it's automatically bad. But there, of course, we look at the trends. Secondly, we also look for patterns, right? So, for example, in our scale, it is difficult to just look at one page, but instead we are looking for information like, hey, all of our landing pages take more than 10 clicks from the homepage. And then we would find a solution like adding another link module to the homepage, for example, that would solve that, or create something like an HTML sitemap, or a couple of other workarounds that would help us to at least minimize the clicks from the homepage, not necessarily set it down to 1. And then there's also an important factor, it's important to look at the ratio between the crawl depth internally and the external backlinks. And that's why we look at both metrics. So I think if a page has, is far away from the homepage, but has a ton of very high quality external backlinks, that's something you can better live with than, just looking at one metric.
Very interesting. In terms of, you mentioned a little bit earlier, I had one other question. That's why I paused about the crawling thing. I'll come back to it and ask if I think of it. But you also mentioned looking at indexed pages and the quality of indexed pages. Let's jump to that a little bit, because I know one thing that so many people talk about now, and I look at a ton, is like de-indexing, deleting old stuff, fixing, old content. So what are you looking at specifically for indexed and the quality of indexed pages?
Yeah. I can confirm that working pretty well. At least from my standpoint of view. So I think the terminology we use is pruning, and what you described is exactly the way it works. You basically look at all the pages that have weak user signals, quote unquote, and we look at the click-through rate from SERPs. We look at the bounce rate, the time on site, and the pages per visit. So the classic metrics. We try to segment them if possible, either per country, per device, or something else. And then we also look at those pages that are not ranking at all and that do not get traffic in the last 6 months. And those we would put in a bucket of lower priority, or basically of low quality. And we then go ahead and do a couple of things with those pages. We either edit them and rework them and try to just make them better, give them better content, and so on, maybe a redesign. Or we redirect them to another relevant page, or we would no-index them or make sure that they're, first of all, out of the Google index before we further proceed with them, or we would, delete them completely. And that we saw does impact our rankings, pretty well in a very positive way.
And so how are you Screaming Frog with the APIs to find this? But how are you doing that? Because, you mentioned millions of pages, so are you crawling in segments? How are you gathering this data?
Yeah, I think, and I made that experience and had that learning at Dailymotion, where I was director of SEO before, and Dailymotion has about, I think, still around 300 million users and an uncountable amount of pages. And you cannot crawl that beast, right? You can only crawl so far, and even with some solutions, you might get 10 million, 20 million pages deep. But the question is, how much can you do with that data, right? Of course, there are solutions like Deep Crawl and Modify that help you understand that to an extent, but you really think a little more in terms of patterns, and you try to take out a sample of all your pages and then make informed decisions based on that. That's the beauty of large-scale SEO is, on the one hand, you have this overwhelming sea of pages, but on the other hand, they usually all consist of a couple of templates or page types.
Right.
And so by looking at those and segmenting after page types, you can then make informed decisions for the whole site.
Hey everyone, we're just going to pause the interview with Kevin just for one moment. I was researching content strategies for a client the other day, and I was looking at content that their competitors had published that might be great topics that my client could write about. What I wanted to know was, how many shares did this stuff get? Who linked to it? Who shared it? And unless you go to an outside tool and enter the URL and you wait for the report, There's no fast way to really see that, except I realized that my sponsor, BuzzSumo, has a free Chrome plugin that will allow you to see this on the fly right in the browser. No matter what article you're looking at, what piece of content, if you click this free plugin from BuzzSumo, it will show you the share counts it got from Facebook, from Twitter, from LinkedIn, from Pinterest. And you can click quick links to have it show to you who else has shared this content, who has linked to this content, and other articles that that same author has written. And one cool thing, of course, is you can't get tweet counts anymore right natively within the content. So this plugin makes it easy to see that again. So check out the plugin and then check out BuzzSumo as well. Of course, you'll get sample data for free using the plugin, and you'll get access to all the full data that they have with an account. So you can go to buzzsumo.com and use the discount code DANSHURE, DANSHURE, to get 30% off 3 months of BuzzSumo. And to my knowledge, BuzzSumo is not promoting their product in any other place. This is the only place you can get a special discount to use BuzzSumo. So go to buzzsumo.com, DANSHURE, for 30% off 3 months. Okay, let's get back to the interview. We'll get back to this indexation stuff in a moment. I remembered the last little thing to close the loop on the crawling. How much do you look at crawling topically? So the use of category pages, silos of content that relate topically. How much have you done there, and has that had an impact as well?
Yes, depending on which site, for example, for Atlassian we're talking about. But yes, crawling topically, we try to get that done as good as possible. And I think in a perfect world, we would even be able to crawl for topics across different domains or across different sites. But that's obviously very, very difficult. And then also there is always a certain overlap. I mean, I think in theory, it's smart to think about isolated topics, but in the real world, it's very difficult. Just think of the topic DevOps, right? That's a very, very broad topic that you can spin across a lot of different categories. So we do constantly try to understand it as good as possible, but I think the amount of action we take on topical crawling and topical understanding is smaller than the hard facts that we look at.
Also, another question that occurred to me is XML sitemaps. Do you have a strategy there? Do you do nested? How does that work on such a large site?
Yeah, for sure. So XML sitemaps are a little easier to compile because you can take that from your backend or the log files, right? So we have in many ways a very automated way of putting together XML sitemaps. And of course, in your specific case, you have to look at what kind of CMS you have and what your backend looks like. But yes, we do try to segment our XML sitemaps in various ways because they're not only a tool for Google to find certain pages, but even more so for us to understand indexation. And so in most ways, we try to compile XML sitemaps according to our URL structure and information architecture, much rather than our topics.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, what a lot of people, and by the way, the new Google Search Console, which is out in beta, shows all this indexation and crawling at a great level, and registering separate subfolders, subdomains, etc. in Search Console shows you all that sitemap data as well. Super useful. Let's get back to the indexation, kind of close the loop on that, and then get to some of the questions from Twitter. In terms of deciding what to do with the content, that's where there seems to be some gray area. I tend to err on not 301 redirecting if I don't have a very exact content match. You mentioned redirecting with something that's relevant. Google will tell you we don't count 301 redirects in terms of PageRank if it's not the same piece of content or very close. So what informs your decision to decide if you should 301 versus just delete the page?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think when we see good user signals on a page, but it doesn't get a lot of organic entrances, that is one indicator for us to say, okay, people like that page, but it doesn't rank well. And maybe we don't want to, put in the effort to completely rework it, or we don't have the resources. In that case, we rather direct that traffic to a page that also does well organically in the hopes that has some compounding effects.
Interesting. So also, I'm thinking of random questions. Rank tracking, large site, what do you use for that?
Yeah, we also use a couple of tools from search metrics to SEO clarity. We look at Search Console sometimes for a certain amount of information, and then I also have Ahrefs and SEMrush. So you see, we have a lot of solutions. We try to not spread ourselves too thin in terms of tools, but again, since all of these have some unique strength, we look at those, and obviously you cannot track all the keywords for all of your sites. So we do have a couple of different buckets for keywords. One of them are basically our 30 most important keywords for every site, right? So that gives us a high-level view. They're very, very competitive. And then we only go to a certain amount of long tail because at some point you just lose overview completely.
Yeah, I tend to do that too. I've been using, a variety of tools. Even like I'll use Authority Labs for rankings and I'll hit my limit, and then I'll go over to Ahrefs and I'll hit my limit. So I kind of figure out ways to work that together. Okay, Kevin, I just opened Twitter and I see more questions than I saw about 45 minutes ago. So let's tackle some of these. So basically I asked in Twitter, who wants to ask you, an in-house SEO at a large company, some questions? So I'm just going to go right in order by the Twitter feed here. Klaus, I'm not going to try to pronounce his last name, at Computer Klaus, Klaus, says, how do you explain that it is not all about immediate results?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Klaus. I actually explained that quite a lot. I think the good thing and the bad thing is working for a huge public company is that everything is measured in quarters and in years, right? And that comes from stakeholders looking and shareholders looking at quarters. And so we really work in a quarterly format, and also try to focus our actions on things that might yield results within a quarter. And most people are very open to that. I think it's mainly a matter of showing results and showing the whole procedure. And the way that we do that is we build our business cases where we write and blog very distinctively about certain things we've done and the results they yielded. And that often implies that it takes a little time for those results to come to light, and then people are very open to understanding that.
Quick segue. And by the way, here, we're 45 minutes in. I'd love to just keep running with the in-house stuff at Atlassian. I'll definitely have you back on the show. I want to just keep going with this topic. So for all the listeners, sorry, you'll have to stick around for some other time to hear about SEO for startups. But I'll point people to your article in the meantime.
Thank you.
One thing, sorry, I distracted myself because I had a question I want to ask off of that. Let me ask Klaus a second question here. So he says, when he wants you to explain when a drop in traffic is part of the goal. I'm not sure what he means by that in context. Are you inferring what he's talking about there?
I can't speak about, I'm not 100% sure what he means, but it's funny because we have those cases a couple of times, and there's one use case. So imagine you have a product landing page that ranks for an amount of generic keywords. Then you build out their own landing pages for those generic keywords to better service them, to provide better content. And that's when we might see the organic traffic for a product landing page go down initially. But looking at the bigger picture, we can attract much more traffic and serve people's needs much better.
I see. So it's really about looking at, like you even hinted at before, the long term, right? Like you might see a drop in a week or a month, but it's really about the long term. I remember my segue here, something I was going to ask later, but I'm going to ask it now in context. You had a post about telling stories. And this is one thing you do very well in your writing, I noticed, like on your LinkedIn profile, on your website, you incorporate story. Just talk to us about that a little bit. Like, what's the importance of communicating data, analysis, etc., in a story format to get your ideas across?
Yeah, thank you, man. That's such another good question that I love. And I learned that a little bit the hard way. I think I'm actually wired in more of the analytical space. I think I'm very analytical in my mindset and try to put a number behind everything. And then I learned that it's just hard to communicate that way, right? And then I learned that everything we learn basically comes from stories. And it's very interesting. I'm reading Noah Harari's Sapiens book right now. It's a fantastic read, by the way. And in it, he explains how stories were like the fundamental way of communicating. And then you see the same reference in Cialdini's Principles of Marketing, where he talks about how young kids basically tell stories to themselves to make sense of the world. And I think that's such a fundamental concept in our communication. And I made that experience that whenever you wrap something in a story that people can relate to, they understand it much better. It's much more internalized, and they have a personal connection. Because I don't want to go too deep here, but we all have our own stories, right? We made our experiences, and we write our story constantly. And so usually when you tell a story about something, people can relate to it much better.
Yeah, I mean, this is a whole other topic I could do a whole other episode on, but I mean, I'm getting more into story lately. I'm also analytical. I like to just present the data. And a thing in my head I've been saying to myself lately is I don't care about stories, but I care that stories get people to care about my ideas. Right? So like it's a vehicle to get people, so executives or people in your audience, if you want somebody to care about your idea, put it in a story like you said. Or as they say, wrap it in bacon, right? Klaus says one last question. Yeah, Klaus has one last question. So, any preferred project management platform?
Yeah, Jira.
The internal one.
Honestly, like, yeah, of course, that's a perfect serve for tons of shameless plugs, right? But you can use Asana as well. You can use other tools. I don't want to say that we're the gold standard, or you have to use us, right? I think whatever works best for you, and I know it's a very it's a very undefined answer, but you have to find the workflow that works for you, and you have to like the tool. I personally, for example, to organize myself, I use Evernote a lot, right? I just like the way it works. I like the way it syncs across my different devices and everything. And then I might transfer that to a Trello or a Jira to work with it internally. But if you don't feel comfortable in the environment or tools you use, it doesn't matter how good they are.
I agree. Okay, Ollie Heyman at Oliver Heyman1 on Twitter wants to know, what's the best way to implement schema at scale? Is this something you've dealt with at Atlassian as well, schema and rich snippets, etc.?
Yes, for sure, 100%. And again, it's a challenge when you deal with so many different types of sites to define the same schema for all of them. Yes, we do that, and I have to refer back to an answer I gave previously that pointed out the benefits of dealing with large sites that use very similar page templates. And so for us, it's not a huge deal to give the same schema to the same page template. We obviously use the schema testing tool to constantly see, if there's something that we're missing or if we have problems. And I constantly measure Search Console and the structured data option there to see if we suddenly, if suddenly something's messed up and then we have errors in our schema or not.
This question makes me think of something I did want to ask, which is your workflow between your technical SEO team and the development team. What does that look like? Do you have like two people that are the head communicators between the two teams, or how do you get that to flow from team to team?
Yes. Obviously, the engineering team or the web team at Atlassian it's a substantial part of our success. If our recommendations are not being implemented, then what are we worth? So we are super heavily integrated in a way that we take part in sprint planning meetings and retro meetings and all kinds of things. We have basically one foot in the engineering team.
Right. So you're really like a part of that team in some respects. It's not like, so I described it as separate, but you're really looking at it as like the same team.
Yes.
Let's see. So Ollie Heyman has a second question. We might have talked about this already, so you can feel free to add something or not. But the thing that moves the needle most on large sites, so maybe that we can turn that into what's something we didn't discuss that maybe you've seen help move the needle.
Yes, so we talk about keyword cannibalization, crawl budget, indexation control. I think internal linking we scratched on, but one thing that we haven't talked about at all that I also learned very, very quickly at Dailymotion is how to deal with spam. And usually it's an issue because large sites often have some sort of community feature, right? So we obviously have a community itself, but sometimes you have a product or a page type that's where people can comment on, and that's publicly surfaced, and so on and so on. And so that, wherever people can game the system, they will. That's just one of the rules in nature. And so obviously they also do on our sites. And we work a lot with spam algorithms and filters. And that's something that I heavily worked on at Dailymotion that yielded actually great results, because of course also Google looks at spam, and of course at some point it can be detrimental, as in where Google puts you in a spammy neighborhood, and you definitely don't want to be in that bucket. So one way is to use simple algorithms that would say whenever a certain word is in the URL or title or body content, it is not surfaced in search engines. Like, for example, a word like download, right? Now, we don't have a lot of pages that need download in their title, so that makes it very easy for us to segment things, or movie, or a combination of those two. And so you can build your own corpus or index of blacklisting words, and then decide what actions to take on that. And, it's very interesting how spammers shoot back. Spammers learn really, really quickly. So if you delete their content, they will notice that, and they will figure out what triggers that deletion. It's almost that they game, or that they reverse engineer our algorithms the way that we reverse engineer Google's algorithm.
I love that answer, because I just had a client email me last night, and they said, we want to turn off blog comments. I know this is slightly different, but I immediately wrote back. I said, no, you can't do that. They're a ranking factor. Google's confirmed that. I love community. I mean, beyond SEO, you get so many insights from your audience. And I think what you're talking about here, having a smart way to deal with spammy user-generated content, is really the way to go. Like, why throw out everything with the bathwater, so to speak, right? I mean, yes. You need to find a way to reap the benefits of that community and interaction. It's so powerful. Like, I get so passionate about this because it really bothers me when people want to cut off the communication between them and their audience and their community. It really digs under my skin. So I think what you're talking about here, finding solutions to deal with that, is really key.
Then we have to fight those fights, right? I don't want to rant too much about it, but I know it's very convenient for everyone to put things into black and white, do or don't. But as SEOs, it's our job to go out there and fight for the trade-off, right? Yes, we might have a little bit of spam, but we also have all these benefits from community and from communication. So let's just step in the ring and do our best to fight spam constantly, instead of going the easy, convenient route and just turning everything off completely and never having to deal with it.
Yeah. Put in a little extra work, a little extra thinking, and you'll get the rewards from that. I like the message. Isaac Camelberger, Isaac Hamel B on Twitter, says, what is your day-to-day job like? Like, just paint that picture take a moment, and, do you work from home? Do you show up at the office? How does that look to you?
Yeah, luckily Atlassian is very, very flexible in those regards. And I have to say, working at home versus being in the office both has advantages and downsides. So I try to find a good balance there. I usually get more done when I'm at home, and I usually get more exposure within the company when I'm in the office. And that allows me to, just talk to my colleagues and make sure that they see SEO, and not only see it, digitally, but also physically. And then we have these conversations, and so much happens during, a lunch meeting where you just talk to people, or meeting at the coffee machine, or those, classics kind of things. Yeah. So day to day, it's never the same, which is one of the reasons why I love my job. But, it's one thing I do routinely every day is the trade-off between making and managing. So obviously, the whole managing aspects involves everything from, politics, which is really big when you're in-house, and managing team members, managing other teams, managing tickets and stuff to get done. And then on the other hand, actually crunching the numbers yourself, digging into the tools and planning the next initiatives.
Super funny. So Matt Lacusta, at Matt Lacusta on Twitter. I'm going to link to all these in the show notes if people want to check out who's asking questions. super funny. He asked, what's your advice for in-house SEOs if you get stuck in a dead end? And then you asked the other day on Twitter and mentioned Rand Fish, what's your advice for in-house SEOs who get stuck in a dead end? Like literally the same question. So I think, and I see Rand did not reply. I know he's a busy guy. I think he's away on his wedding anniversary this week. What I'm going to do, Kevin, is I'm going to link to this tweet here, and people can go to evolvingseo.com/Kevin question. I'm going to create a short URL. All the listeners out there, if you have ideas, thoughts for Kevin to answer this, just chime in on his tweet right there directly, evolvingseo.com/Kevin question. Kevin, though, I'm going to give you the opportunity to chime in here with anything maybe you've learned since asking this, or any insights that you might have, or maybe like just elaborating on what drew you to ask this question in the first place.
Yeah. Thanks so much, first of all, for that. Super kind of you. It actually stems from me writing an article about that question. I think, and that perfectly closes the loop of what we talked about in the beginning, that I personally feel that enterprise SEO or in-house SEO is not talked about enough. And that there's this whole struggle outside of the actual SEO knowledge that nobody talks about, right? Like, our problem is not knowing what to do. Our problem is getting it done. And so, being stuck in the in-house dead end is one of the issues that I saw over and over, especially when I was consulting. I don't feel that I'm stuck in a dead end at all right now at Atlassian. And what it means is that you're an in-house SEO, but you're extremely limited in your technical capabilities to implement something. For example, when your CMS is just, not very functional for that, or you have a lot of technical debt, so you don't get the engineering resources, or you get pushback from politics in the company, or you deal with a whole plethora of challenges that are outside the SEO knowledge realm. And I think almost everything that we talked about plays a little bit into that question. It's a lot of evangelizing, building out use cases. It's about that personal interaction that can help you. And then to give a little insight into what I want to write about, when it comes to the technical limitations, it's really about finding ways as an SEO to work outside of the main site. And that could mean to maybe, move the blog to WordPress and put it on a subdirectory or even a subdomain that you can completely control, right? Or to focus more on things like content marketing that would then deliver traffic and maybe backlinks and organic rankings to those sites.
That's great. Yeah, I'm going to link to that, and people can go directly to it. evolvingseo.com/Kevin question. I love that, just making a little short URL. I've got like one or two Twitter questions left, but that makes me think of something I did want to ask. I'm this close to being hired by a very, very big company that has a very large site to be an outside consultant for them. They basically have the challenge where they saw a quality drop from the May update. They're trying to go through content relaunches. It's going to be a big project. What advice would you have for somebody like me coming in as an outside consultant to ensure that I'm doing these things to maybe get things done? So asked another way, what are some things you look for in an outside consultant agency, etc., to provide them to you to make your job in-house easier?
Yeah, perfect. First of all, congratulations for that opportunity for you.
Thank you.
And then second, I think one way that really helps you to assess, what impact you can have and what the problems are is to talk to everybody who's not involved in hiring you. So talk to everybody outside the SEO team, whether that's the engineering team, other marketing departments, and get a good scoop of where those problems initially stem from. So very often it has, like a patient has to develop the disease from some way. Maybe he's overweight, maybe it's genetic, maybe, there are different reasons for that. And it's the same for an issue of a brand or a large company. Either it's that they never had SEO in-house, or they never cared about SEO, or they were never able to implement SEO. And I think the earlier you find that root cause that led to that situation, the better of a job you can actually do for that company.
Right. You're talking about like surface symptoms versus the actual underlying chronic disease. Like somebody that's overweight, they have bad knees and they're thinking, well, maybe I just need like surgery on my knees. No, you need to lose weight. Like Okay, why do you need to lose weight? Because you're eating too much. Why are you eating too much? Like you keep going back. So I get it. I think that's great advice because it's not something I've necessarily done proactively. It's something that's happened reactively where I randomly get introduced to the content marketing manager and I realize like, oh my goodness, you're like totally doing everything wrong. And then that, so I think that's really great advice.
It goes back to that asking yourself 5 times why method. I might butcher who came up with that originally, but if you just Google for 5 whys, it's that way of asking yourself 5 times why a certain thing is. And if you apply that to business as well in SEO, you get to the root cause.
Yeah, I love that. So unless I refresh and there's more questions, I've got one last question here on Twitter. A guy that I see a lot on Twitter, I have no idea how to pronounce his name, Marchin something. It's at MartijNoud. I don't know if you've seen this guy or know how to pronounce that. On Twitter, he wants to know, how do you keep your knowledge up to date? It can be very hard to go very in depth on specific aspects of SEO since you need to do all of SEO. And then Dana Di Tommaso, who was a guest a few weeks ago, chimed in and said, curious about that one too. So keeping up to date, how do you handle that?
Cool, yeah. Again, I divide that aspect of my time into 2 buckets. One of them is having an up-to-date blog feed. So I use Feedly to keep myself up to date and constantly add new blogs and seed out old ones. And then, listen or following Twitter as much as you can, because I feel like a lot of things are discussed there and a lot of good ideas surface on Twitter. Then talking to colleagues on conferences, that obviously has a huge impact because the SEO community lives from sharing. That's how, we made that a profession in the first place. It's not from one person understanding everything. It's from the community puzzling things together. I think that's one aspect. And then the second aspect is really educating yourself in a way that you learn from what you actually do. We're very big on documenting everything at Atlassian that impacts organic traffic and everything that we learn from our implementations. So it's one thing to read in a big ranking factor study that something is important, and it's another thing to apply that and make your own experiences. Right? So one thing that I talk about in the whole SEO and machine learning article and the presentation that I gave in the Digital Summit in Denver was that Google is going further in the direction of applying or weighting ranking factors differently for each industry, right? So we might see different ranking factors having a bigger impact in the travel industry compared to the health industry, for example. Right. And that is huge because that means we'll have to understand every industry, not SEO as a whole. And that means that you have to go out and test and really learn from your own mistakes or your own successes.
Yeah, this is something I've thought about for years, and something I try to remind clients and myself every day is that when we say SEO, I mean, we're basically saying like the world, like life, like it's a giant topic. And I think that's where a lot of arguments come from is like, one person over here that's, in-house for an insurance company and then a consultant over here that does SEO for, tech companies. They're going to be arguing about ranking factors, backlinks, etc. But to me, it's 2 completely different conversations. Like you wouldn't market a dentist the same way you market a tech company or a software company. Like those 2 ideas are ludicrous to me. So the fact that you would argue about like, well, SEO is, got to be the same for insurance as it is for like a pizza shop, that makes no sense. So I love that. And I want to encourage the listeners to like be aware of that. Like when you're studying ranking factors, etc., always be questioning, does this apply to my situation? I think that's something we all easily forget.
Yes.
After my little rant there. So, okay, let me hit pause and let's talk about the SEMrush contest. I'm going to tell listeners how to enter that, and then we're going to wrap things up in just a moment. Okay, so again, this is your chance to win a free SEMrush account. They called it extended in email. I'll try to update the show notes as to what that means, if that's like 90 days or a year. I'm not quite sure. We'll find out. Here's what you need to do. Go to iTunes, subscribe to Experts in the Wire, leave a review, an honest review. Like if this is the first show you've listened to and you have no honest review, I'm going to give you another option, but please leave an honest review. It's one way that I can make the show better and really listen to, back to community, the things that, you think about this podcast. So subscribe, leave a review, screenshot your review, and email it to me, dan@evolvingseo.com, with the subject SEMrush contest. Now, like I said, if you've already left a review or you've already subscribed or like you don't want to do any of that for whatever reason, go to evolvingseo.com/wire and sign up on my email list and then email me with the subject SEMrush contest. Either way, that will enter you into the contest, and we're going to choose the one winner at random and send you the free account. Actually, I should have a time range here too. So this is going to post towards the end of September. Let's give this until the end of October. Let's give this a full month for anyone to enter this contest. And again, that's like going to be hundreds of dollars of savings on a free SEMrush account. I'm very excited to see how this goes. I've never done a contest before in this podcast, so I'm curious to see how the listeners respond to that. Okay, Kevin, this has been a fascinating discussion. I've really enjoyed it. We've covered so much. I think it's, you mentioned like all of us in the SEO world sharing, like that's exactly what I was thinking was happening, because we're talking, I'm on Twitter, people are asking questions like as we're chatting, and I'm refreshing Twitter. And I think that's just such a cool aspect of this industry, how we all kind of talk and learn from one another. So, and it's great to have you as an in-house SEO. I hope more in-house SEOs kind of share what they know, because there's not much of that. So thank you again, Kevin, for that. I appreciate that. Tell the listeners where they can find you online, and if you're going to be out there anywhere in the real world, they can find you. Conferences.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. If you just Google Kevin Indig, you'll find all of my stuff, my presences. I tweet a lot, and I'm Kevin_Indig on Twitter. And then I compile everything on my website, kevinindig.com. I refer to all the other guests' blogs and podcast appearances, interviews, presentations, all that kind of stuff from the website. So you should find everything there.
Awesome. So definitely go check out Kevin. By the way, I don't say this very much. I have a list on Twitter of all the people that have been a guest in the show, and I'll link to it in the show notes. I think if you go to like evolvingseo.com/Twitter list, maybe I'll create a redo. evolvingseo.com/Twitter list. You can find a Twitter list of every guest that's been on Experts in the Wire. And of course, I'll put you in there, Kevin. So, all right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on what episode were we? 30? No, not 30. 83 of Experts in the Wire. And I will talk to you next time. Thanks, Kevin.
Thank you so much.